morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Monday, September 23rd, meeting of the Portland Children's Levy Allocation Committee. I'm City Commissioner and Allocation Chair Dan Saltzman, and I want to introduce my colleagues, beginning on my far right, Mitch Horniker, who represents the Portland Business Alliance. Next to him is Julie S. Young, who is a citizen member appointed by the City Council. And on my immediate left is Multnomah County Commissioner Deborah Kafori. And next to her is Serena Stoudemire Wesley, who represents the citizens of Multnomah County. We have another round of introductions of the Children's Levy staff as well. Director Lisa Pellegrino, who is also in charge of after-school investments. Assistant Director Meg McElroy, who oversees the early childhood and mentoring investments. Lisa Hansel, who supervises the foster care and child abuse prevention and intervention investments. Communications Director Mary Gay Broderick, and Fiscal Specialist John Kelly. So we have a full agenda, but before we dive in, I'd like to give some background on the Portland Children's Levy. The Portland voters created the levy in 2002 and overwhelmingly renewed it in 2008, and then overwhelmingly renewed it just last May of this year, 2013. The levy annually provides about $10 million to support organizations reaching about 10,000 children and their families through programs in early childhood, after school and mentoring, child abuse prevention and intervention, and helping children in foster care succeed. With the next funding round that we'll be talking about today, the funding will begin in the spring. We will also begin funding programs to alleviate child hunger. The levy operates with a 5% administrative rate and is annually audited by an outside independent firm. So the first item up today is to approve our minutes of our July 29th meeting. I entertain a motion to approve the minutes. If there's no corrections or clarifications.
So moved. Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, the minutes are approved. And next, we always begin our meetings with an opportunity for the public to comment on general levy topics. We have time later in our agenda for further testimony when we talk about the goals for the levy. So if there's anybody now who has any general public comment on the levy, this would be the time to come forward. Okay, seeing none, then we will move on to our next item, which is a review of the draft of the levy overall goals, as well as specific program goals in each funding area. Staff has reviewed public comment on these areas during the past few weeks and provide us some brief input on that. And after hearing from the staff, we'll open up the floor for more public comment, after which we will decide whether to take a vote on this today, in other words, the overall goal and the specific goals, or to delay it until our October meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Meg McElroy.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to do a little bit of background to remind us how we got to this point, and then we'll move on to hearing comments from the audience that are here today. So at our July meeting, you may remember that we reviewed with you all some analysis on other levies in other cities up and down the West Coast, Seattle, San Francisco, and Oakland, trying to compare how they were doing over their tenure to how our Portland levy is doing. And one of the things that we discovered is that all of them had some overarching goals that help guide and inform where they direct their funding. Similarly, we looked closely at Oakland because we found their model very informative for us and discovered that even further beneath their sort of overarching goals were very specific strategies chosen for how they were directing their funding toward the specific areas of focus that they had chosen. So we presented to you all that we wanted to sort of head in that direction as a path to guide and frame the funding over the 5 years in this levy, and you all agreed to that path forward. So taking that first step, we as a staff proposed that we would craft some overarching goals that would guide our levy funding, both sort of levy-wide as well as for our 6 program areas, and submit that all to you for review and revision, and then out to the public for review and revision. So in crafting those goals, we consulted not only the other levies that I just mentioned, but we also looked locally to the Cradle to Career Partnership, the Sun Service System, the state's Early Learning Council, the state's Office of education, at the OEIB framework, and began to kind of come up with the goal language that we wanted to use in thinking about how to craft those goals. We sent out a draft to you all in mid-August. After a couple weeks of letting it simmer with you, we had some initial feedback. We incorporated that feedback from you all, and then sent out on September 4th to the public the draft goals in that initial sort of original form. And we sent it out through our database network, we sent it out through our e-newsletter, we sent it out through our Facebook site, our website, and then specifically a directed email to grantees asking them to distribute it to their networks. Last week we received input. As of last week, we kind of closed that 2-week loop for input from the public, and we had 15 responses. And so we incorporated some of those into revising the proposed goals. And in the handout that was available as folks walked in, there should be a table that kind of helps outline so that folks can follow along what the original goals were that we sent out and then what was revised as of today. I want to just quickly review that there were sort of 4 themes in some of the input that came out that we didn't incorporate, and I want to explain why. One of the things that we heard was that the goals should incorporate that we are supporting programs, but we decided, well, supporting programs is the way in which the levy would achieve its goals, so we didn't want to incorporate that language. One was that we focus on best practices, and again, in goal language, we didn't feel like that was necessarily needing to be articulated because, again, it's one of the ways in which we achieve the kinds of goals that we're talking about is by supporting best practices. One suggestion was to define some of the terms in the goal language, but in the goals themselves, we wanted to keep them short and kind of at the higher level and didn't want to get into the definition of terms at that point. And then one other sort of thing that came out was that some of the goal language articulated specific strategies for the funding, and we feel like that's sort of the next step in this process, and that this initial discussion is really about high-level goals that talk about the kind of changes we want to see in children by virtue of having this resource of the levy in our community. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you all have, and then I will turn it over to individuals here who want to come up and provide input.
So are you going to present on the program area goals as well? Or just what we were suggesting is that I wasn't going to read through them, but if you would like me to do that, I can. There's a table up on the screen right now that's looking at you're making a good process suggestion, thank you for clarifying that, around the overall goals. So I think it probably does make sense for us to take initially testimony on the overall goals and then go into the individual program area goals, unless any of my colleagues have another process suggestion. Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
Any discussion from the members here on the overall?
Do you want to have discussion now, or do you want to hold your discussion until after you hear from anyone here?
Yeah, let's see. Do we have anybody who wishes to testify on the proposed overall goals for the levy? Okay, I see one person. Come on up. Welcome. Just give us your name, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Mike Bolter. I'm the CEO of Boys and Girls Aid, 128-year-old child welfare agency here in Oregon. I'd like to say it's more technical or well thought through, but I'd like to speak to the foster care overall goal. And I did write testimony to this effect. And I appreciate, I don't know if I influenced the direction of the change or not, but my biggest concern, it says, help children in foster care succeed. And I'll probably become an irritant to you over time. The challenge I have is I'm not sure that the goal should talk about children succeeding in foster care, but succeeding getting out of foster care. So a suggested goal might be helping children safely exit or successfully exit foster care. And given 3 minutes, the only thing I can tell you is we've learned a lot about medical care and that the notion of staying in a hospital isn't a healthy thing. That in fact, the goal is to get you out of the hospital as quickly as possible. There's things to be done in the hospital, just like there's things to be done in foster care. But the best thing we can do for children is get them out as quickly as possible, whether that's back to their own family or adoption or permanent guardianship, or some strategy that gets them out, because in general, foster care is a damaging place to stay. So I think, in short, I'm certainly available to the staff, but I think this is the appropriate level to have the conversation in trying to influence the overall goal rather than the details of it.
So you're interested, Michael, in having it say, helping children
Safely
foster
exit,
care-
quickly
safely
exit. Something about exit. Succeed in exiting, have a
Foster
successful exit. But I think the co-conspiracy we have about foster care is that we increasingly are helping young people be successful in foster care. It's because we've somehow accepted that that's an okay place to be, and it's not. Much like if we said, help children successfully overcome abuse. It's an unhealthy state.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, Deborah?
I guess I read this one a little bit differently. I think it sounds like the way that you are describing it, that the goal would be to help children succeed in foster care, whereas I read it as helping children who are currently in foster care succeed. And that success might be leaving foster care. I mean, hopefully that's one of, but it's also while they are in foster care, they are successful in school and successful in their life, setting up life goals. So am I wrong?
I think that's how that was the, I think, intent in how we worded it as well. I think one of the challenges with the suggestion on the table is the notion that in some ways the Department of Human Services Child Welfare is responsible for getting children out of foster care. And so I think we were all concerned about using sort of the word exit and somehow sort of setting up Levy programs for having the responsibility for exiting children out of foster care. I appreciate that the idea is we should be helping support that exit strategy, absolutely. But I'm not sure how including the word exit here sort of pushes us into a realm of responsibility that maybe isn't necessarily ours. So I think maybe I would suggest that as staff we could talk with Michael and figure out sort of something that gets at the intent of what he's trying to say, but also doesn't sort of steer things too far afield for the levy.
Well, so just one of the other things that has come up in public input to some extent is, for instance, easing the transition out of foster care or out as children age out of foster care. And although I'm not sure I'm not sure the timeline necessarily is what's come up as the issue so much as making sure that it's a successful transition. So I think that's more the focus, is to make sure that we're helping support success in whatever we're doing for foster youth.
So, I mean, since we sort of got into the
Program.
specifics, why don't you go ahead and run through all the program goals?
Say them all?
And then we'll have testimony on overall goals or on program goals.
Okay, so anyone can come up and do whatever testimony they have, regardless of the. Yep, great.
Let's do it that way.
So you want me to read them, or you want me just to?
Did you have them on the PowerPoint?
They're on the PowerPoint, and they are also on a handout that was available to the public, and then you all should have them as well in your packets.
Yeah, why don't you read
Okay,
through
sure.
them?
I'd be happy to.
It's
Okay.
not that long.
So for the original goals, actually, what I'll read, rather than read the originals and the proposed.
Yeah, just read the
Oh,
proposed.
exactly. Thank you.
Proposed.
So the overall goals for the levy, so this is across everything: prepare children for school, support children's success inside and outside of school, and reduce racial and ethnic disparities in children's well-being and school success. For goals for the program areas for early childhood, support children's early development and readiness for kindergarten. For child abuse prevention and intervention, prevent child abuse and neglect and support vulnerable families. For foster care, help children in foster care succeed. For after school, provide safe and constructive after-school and summer programming that supports children's well-being and school success. For mentoring, connect children and youth with caring adult role models that support their well-being. And for hunger relief, expand access to healthy, nutritious food for hungry children.
Great. Okay. So now, if anybody wishes to testify on either the overall levy goals or this individual program goals, this would be your opportunity to come up and testify. Okay, why don't we, I see two hands raised. Why don't you two gentlemen come on up? We can take three at a time, or we can take two at a time, so.
Morning.
And all you have to do is just give us your name and or if you want to give us your name and organization you're affiliated with, you're welcome to do that too. We'll start with you, Ken.
Yeah, I'm Ken Thrasher. I am a founder and board member for Oregon Mentors, past board member of Friends of the Children, and the current board chair of College Possible. And I want to talk today about the advocacy for the mentoring investments, because I think it's really important that we keep that focus on as we look at, I think, the state's goals for 40-40-20 and cradle to career, what we're doing in Multnomah County, what you're doing with this opportunity levy that you created with your leadership. I think it's a tremendous connection in mentoring between some of the early childhood investments we're making and the college career prep investments we're making kind of at the back end. So connecting this middle strategy, I think, avoids fade out from early childhood investments and really helps put our kids in a position through rigor, relevance, and relationship to be successful going forward. And, you know, we've seen, having been mentored by Bill Nato and having mentored young people, I really see that connection between academic success, avoiding teen parenting and juvenile criminal justice behaviors. And there's a tremendous payback, a triple payback I think we get in the student in the way they achieve from their academic side, but also workforce development and avoiding social costs. So when we look at that, with mentoring today with a 3 to 10 times return on investment, I know Friends is at 7.2, and the College Possible program, which is a near-peer mentoring program, is getting low-income students at the rate of 10-to-1 ratio versus those who don't go through the program to graduate from college. Those kind of results are really important for us to really leverage both the state and our county initiatives. So I think as we look at those investments and connect them to the data and accountability and the quality that Oregon Mentors is doing in some of their program approaches, we really are positioning more kids to be successful in the system. And, you know, we have some new strategies that are going to touch health in many of these organizations, looking at those non-cognitive skills to keep kids on task and really improve the way we deliver academic success. So I think by us keeping investments focused there, we really are achieving a lot of connected goals within the county and state. So I want to thank you for those investments.
Thanks, Ken.
Good morning. Gerald Deloney, I'm the co-chair of the Coalition of Communities of Color, and I work for self-enhancement. The first one I wanted to talk about was the overall goal of reducing racial and ethnic disparities to children's well-being and school success. And, you know, intellectually, when we say reducing these disparities, that's really great, but if we don't connect it to funding, then it doesn't really mean anything. And I know, looking at statistics from the levy over this last period of time, 2/3 of the children served were children of color, but less than 1/3 of the money went to culturally specific organizations. To me, there's a little disconnect in there, and that we have to look a little bit harder if we do mean this, because for the last 2 years, we've been talking about equity, equity, equity every place we go. But only when it comes time to allocate funding can we really impact equity and help equity happen. So I hope that when we start talking about our different equity lenses, that we actually put that on when we actually start trying to do funding. The other thing that I wanted to speak to was this thing about, we use this word best practices, and I know in the original legislation we start talking about working with proven programs. Those are not the same thing, because I can decide today that I want to go to a uniform, what's called best practice, and I haven't been doing it, but now I'm a best practice, and somehow it puts me in the game to do best practices, so now I'm in the game playing the game. When I haven't demonstrated that I know how to do this, I haven't been effective at it. So I think that we need to finally start doing a test on what's a proven program and what's not a proven program, because the words are there. I mean, they've been there all this time, but we don't have a test yet. So we need to start talking about how can we delineate who proven programs are and who's not proven programs, because my understanding is we have less dollars to work with and resources become scarce, then it's time to start putting money where money counts. So I hope that we do something about that. And then I guess my final comment, as we start talking about food relief and putting this in the process, I hope that the money follows the child, that food follows the child. If we're serving a child over here, then food relief needs to be connected to that child, because those children that are being served within the program are those children that need money, and I don't see making another program someplace else to serve another group of children. That would not be cost effective. I think we have to look at who we're serving and have the food relief dollars follow the child.
Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony. Is there anybody else?
Under the 1 second.
Oh, I'm done in 1 second? I'm good. Normally it'd be beeping on me, right?
You're a seasoned veteran here. You're a seasoned veteran. We
And
know.
you'll see me again.
Okay. Thank you,
Thank you,
gentlemen. Are there others who wish to testify? Come on up. And if you just give us your name, and if you wish to give an organization you're affiliated with, you can do that too, and you each have 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning. My name is Mike Wells. I'm co-chair of Oregon Mentors Board. And I want to thank the Portland Children's Levy for making a significant investment in mentoring. We know that it really makes a difference. The quality of mentoring is even more important. We know from research that high-quality programs have great results, and if there isn't quality, it can sometimes be even detrimental. That's why we think it's important that programs incorporate best practices and quality. We've designed a year-long intensive continuous program called quality-based mentoring that helps these programs assess and increase the efficiency of their operations. Of the 8 mentoring programs that the Levy has funded, 2 of those programs have gone through our quality-based mentoring, and 4 more are signed up. So we appreciate that you're funding those organizations and that you're directing those funds to some of the strongest programs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Celeste Jansen. I'm Executive Director of Oregon Mentors. I wanted to share 2 pieces of research that have come across my desk and that I thought are fairly important for folks in your shoes. First of all, there was recently an article that was created by 2 researchers from the University of Pittsburgh, and they looked at a variety of different youth settings: early childhood, foster care, mentoring, and actually in the schoolroom, and as well as home visitations. And they found that a key component that made that work every single time was the presence of a strong relationship for a youth, and that having a strong relationship is really an important way to help that child succeed. And I think we often think about that in mentoring programs. What I think this article did was really talk about outside of mentoring and really among all youth interventions, having what they called a developmental relationship was key in order to have youth reach successful outcomes. So that's one interesting recent study. A second was one about mentoring that I think was interesting in that they said if you'd like to have a particular targeted intervention, you could find a teen pregnancy program or a substance abuse program, whatever it is where you wanted to direct money and put money in that area. But mentoring is something that's called multimodal, and that in enrolling a youth in a mentoring program, you're able to then deal with a variety of different strategies in an evidence-based way that's as strong as if you were to direct money in one specific area. And I think that that's a pretty interesting concept, knowing that kids that are enrolled in many of these programs are coming with not just one issue, but with many in their lives. And so I think that multimodal strategy is an interesting one and something that has a lot of promise.
Okay.
And I also would like to thank you for your investment in children in the community, and we're so blessed to have the Portland Children's Levy in our community.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both for being here. Other people wish to testify on the goals, draft goals? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll move along.
All right.
So we're basically at the point of, if there's questions that the allocation committee members have of staff, we'll
and discussions among yourself.
Discussions among ourselves.
And you can agree to have the goals revised further after discussion today and come back at our next meeting for sort of a final vote, or you could decide to do that today. I think those are your options.
We could vote on the goals today
or ask for staff
have
to revise them
discussion.
and come back.
Questions of staff or discussion amongst committee members about the goals?
I have a comment. I would be willing to and support having staff and with our input, if you would like, and folks who are interested to kind of finesse the foster care goal a little bit more, so because I mean, again, it was clear to me, but apparently if it's not clear to others, then that's not helpful. So I'd like it to, if we could spend some time to massage it, that would be great.
Is that something we could
I think that's easily doable, yeah.
Is that something we could do now? I mean,
I don't know that, I think wordsmithing something right now is the best use of time and probably could start to become a little bit awkward. So my proposal would be that we do that, maybe come up with different iterations and float those and try to see if we can land on something that we feel comfortable with.
If you have some general direction you would like us to go based on the comments, that would be helpful to hear.
Other discussion on some of the draft goals?
Well, I would echo what Commissioner Kafori said about the goal around foster care. It was quite clear to me, and I was actually quite comfortable with it. But I appreciate Mr. Bolter's comment. I certainly agree that it would be good for us to be able to have something that meets a greater area of comfort with the experts who really do work in that field. So I'm fine with that. But I appreciate your comment earlier about the fact that that there are organizations that are responsible for helping children exit foster care, and our charge, as I understand it, is to not necessarily work with the parents who may be needing to have services that will help the children exit. We really are focusing on what do the children need, and I feel that that's really is what this states. And so just very willing to hear whether there's another way to put it, but I want to make sure that we are not putting ourselves in a situation where we need to provide services to the children. And in some cases that may involve their parent in the room, but our focus is not on the parent.
For me, I think we also need to keep in mind that some kids do stay in foster care, and that in some instances it is a good place for them. It's unfortunate that they have to be there, but they're there, and some are going to be staying. They're not all going to be able to be exited. That's, I would say, a pipe dream, but it's there. But they also need to succeed while they're there, as well as have some strategy for exit for those who do exit out of the system, and that is a safe exit, but also that there's something after for them, that there's something that's been established for them when they do leave out of foster care. If they've been in there and they turn 18, are they going to college? What is there after the foster care? And I know it's a lot, but as long as succeed and exit is part of that strategy, I think that's okay. I think that works for me.
And I believe the age range that we serve kids in the foster care arena is up to 21, 24. Okay, so we do actually look at programs that help kids transition out of foster care successfully. Yeah, but come up here. You just introduce yourself.
Lisa Hansel with the Children's Levy, and I'm the foster care grant manager. One of the things I think will help make it clear is once we establish the strategies, that will show how we're intending to help children in foster care succeed. And certainly one of the strategies could be to help assure that children are placed in a permanent situation, whether that is back safely with their families or in permanent adoptive homes. I think that once we have the strategies, it will be clear what we mean by help children in foster care succeed. And those words were specifically selected, not meaning that they can't change, but they were selected because they're the same words that are in the ballot language, helping children in foster care succeed. So just one additional point, certainly open to modifications though.
So a lot of these points will be fleshed out in the strategies that accompany the goal of helping children in foster care.
I mean, that's how I'm seeing it. This is all new for all of us here with the levy, but I believe that the strategies will help make it more clear about what it is we're intending to do with each of the funding areas.
Okay. So are there any concerns or discussion on any of the other overall goals for the levy or the specific program goals? I'm thinking if there aren't, maybe we could vote on those today and then return on the foster care one in our October meeting.
Sure, absolutely.
If that's the will of the committee to keep things rolling.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, well then I would entertain a motion to approve the overall goals for the levy and the goals for the program areas except for the foster care one.
I second that motion.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, so we've adopted all the goals except for the foster care goal, which we'll come back to in our October meeting. And now staff, our next item on our agenda, staff will go over in more detail some specifics of the next funding round, including allocation of resources between the funding areas, a review of the most recent request for investment, or RFI, and how it might be revised, and funding strategies within the funding areas. So
I'll start.
Lisa Hansel's going to start.
Thank you. Establishing goals is one set of the decisions that the allocation committee will need to make before the request for investment is released in January. There are additional decisions that you all will also need to make prior to that time, and wanted to take some time today just to begin framing up those additional decision points that will come later this fall. We're raising these issues right now just as background for the allocation committee, no decisions today, and also to alert potential grant seekers as to the major issues that will affect and impact the request for investments that are released in January. One of those decision points will come around the allocation of the resources available. So for each of the funding areas, the allocation committee will need to decide what percentage of the total revenues will go for those funding areas. Those amounts will be included in each RFI. At this point, we're gathering community input through a written survey that's available on our website. We'll be taking the survey input through September 30th. And on the screen, it'll flash our website where you can access the Survey Monkey. At this point, we have about 350 responses, and part of what people are giving us input on is allocation of resources, what percentage should go to each funding area. So we'll have that for you in October, as well as a recommendation for funding for the allocation breakdown. And then you'll have a chance to discuss, hear input from the community at that time as well, and hopefully make a decision in October on that, or possibly November.
Likely November, just in order to allow discussion and people to come back for additional revisions potentially.
So our November meeting would be where we make a decision about how to allocate $1 amongst the 5 program areas.
I mean, again, last time we had targeted that to be much sooner. There was ongoing discussion. There was requests for different proposals to be put forward about how we allocate those. And so the decision ended up taking about 4 meetings. So, I mean, I don't know exactly. It will depend partly on what you all hear, what you all decide to do, and where you want to head with that. So we should have more data for you next time around, but I can't guarantee that you'll decide based on that, or if you want to hear additional input or come up with different ideas.
Right, your first opportunity to discuss it further will be in October.
Okay.
and decision will need to be made before we can release the request for investments.
Right, right.
And also keep in mind that hunger will be a new funding area that wasn't part of our work previously, so that will be a new area for allocating funds as well. So just as historical background, in 2008, when the decisions were made, we had community input at that time as well. We had a written survey that went as part of our community public meetings. We had 3 public meetings, and as part of those meetings, we also handed out a survey. People gave us input on the breakdown of resources at that time as well. We brought that information to the allocation committee. The allocation committee considered that input and then made decisions, like Lisa said, after a few meetings of hearing public testimony and going back and forth discussing. So the committee, let's see if we can have the chart up there as well. Would be helpful.
Okay, so.
Okay. So basically, the input had from the public and then through the discussions, you'll see in the first column, or the first column is the program areas, the second column is the initial allocation, 1/3 of the funding for early childhood, 20% for child abuse, 13.5% for foster care, after school was 20%, and mentoring 13.5%. So that was what the initial allocation was. That was in line with community input. And then from there, the actual allocations, the next column to the right, is what the funding ended up being after the awards were made. So there were slight differences in those amounts. Primarily the difference, early childhood and child abuse, there's a lot of overlap between those 2 areas. We fund a lot of early childhood in child abuse prevention, and a lot of the work that's done in early childhood is really can be seen as child abuse prevention efforts as well. And so when it came time for the funding decisions, based on the applications that were received and the decision-making process, the committee decided to transfer a small amount of the funding that was originally dedicated for child abuse into the early childhood area. The same type of thing happened. You'll see the mentoring was slightly less than what was originally set forth, and that was primarily because after-school programs had so many more applications, and just based on the amount of funding that was left in the mentoring category and the grants applications that were there, the committee made the decision to move a small amount from mentoring to after-school. Some additional things happened after funding awards were made. One was the recession and the diminishing home values created a situation where over the past 2 fiscal years, we had to make about a 40% reduction in we had a 40% reduction in funding, which meant we had to reduce grants. So we went through a whole process there. And additionally, this year we were slated for an additional reduction due to the library district passing, which we were going to receive an additional 11% reduction. And with that coming, the county agreed to take on funding 8 of the Sun School programs that the Levy was funding. So you'll see by that it affected the percentage of overall Levy funds that went to after school. So that accounts for where we are today in terms of allocation breakdowns. And that's pretty much, so
I understand, so the after-school funding in the 2013-14 category is 16.5%.
Correct.
I'm sorry, yeah, 16.5.
Of total, correct.
That reflects the fact that the county assumed funding for 8 Sun School programs that
right.
used to be part of that.
Right, and so that affects the whole balance of what percentage of investment the Levy has in after school, because that was almost $1 million, I believe, of funding that the county now is funding. So that reduces the overall portion of after-school funding.
Okay.
We wanted to bring this to your attention because it's one thing to say, well, often people, last time around anyway, said, well, what are we investing now? If we want to decide what we should do going forward, what are we doing now? Well, we wanted to explain to you that it changed over time. So the original intent was one thing, and then when reductions in revenues happened, that allocation formula changed over time, and it wasn't necessarily by design in the sense that you all said, I want to devote less resources to this category. It was because of circumstances. So that is just something we wanted you all to take into account as you face now forward. How do you want to divide the current resources between these funding categories? You may need to consider what happened over time and consider whether you want to keep it that way or not. And as I said, we'll be able to bring some input for you next time to help you form those thoughts about what you want to do going forward. But we want to make sure you understood how we got to where we are, especially because we have new members on the committee who did not sit with us through the reduction process. So you understand how that kind of came to be. And also so folks sitting grant seekers also understand where we're coming from on that. So we also thought, was there any questions or any confusions? Because I know folks were not here for, actually almost everybody here was not here for that process.
I
So
think Commissioner
Dan might
Saltzman
be
was
the only one,
one.
actually. So
you're here for
if
the
there's questions or
reductions, right?
confusions, we just want to make sure we clear that up now before we start taking, we're going to move into decision mode in the next few meetings.
I do have a question. On the packet that we have here before us, the chart that was up had under mentoring 13%, but on the figures that we're seeing up on the chart in the sky, it says 16.5.
Typo. I did that, sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
That should say 13.
Okay.
Clearly, the after-school number is 16.5, and
Oh.
clearly I just
Good
duplicated
catch,
that
Deborah.
one. Thank you.
I was going,
And I was
Thank
the
you.
proofreader, so I guess I have to take final responsibility for that. Sorry about that.
So the mentoring number should be 13.5%.
It should be, for the 2013-14, it should be 13%. It started as 13.5, went to 12.8, and should be 13.
and then, sorry if you said this already and I didn't hear you. With the hunger piece, are we going to change this allocation so that there's a percentage that goes to hunger, or?
Yes.
Yes, hunger will need to be included as a new funding area.
Okay, so the 2013-14 allocation is proposed, or it's what we did?
That's what we're obligated in right now.
This is
That's
where
what
we're
currently
currently
exists.
operating. So there are no allocation breakdowns for beginning July 1st, 2014. And that's where you all will need to make a decision about what percentage of the resources will go to each funding area. And that will be a future meeting. We'll come next meeting with what the public input says and some different pieces there of interpretation around the public input and percentages and possibly other things to consider when making the allocations. And then you'll begin receiving further input at that meeting and then discussion and as much discussion and input as you need before the allocations decision
This
is
is
made.
really a snapshot of what was done in the past, but we're not, we're starting with a blank slate, in essence.
Right.
How we want to,
Exactly.
what percentages we want to allocate the dollars amongst the program areas is really up to this committee after public testimony, and that'll be one of the key decisions we have to make.
Right.
To that end, Dan, and I traded emails with Lisa, I would like to see if we can at least attempt to identify the quote-unquote size of the problem, both impact to the community and number of children in each of these categories, recognizing that some of the categories might be pretty difficult to do that with, but I would, it seems like it would be one important data point for us as we decide how much we're going to allocate to each category.
One of our thoughts, I did exchange emails with Mitch, and I didn't necessarily get a chance to connect with all of you. Our plan between meetings, so we have September and we have a meeting now scheduled for the end of October. Between meetings, we thought we would try to put together, we have a lot of data that we present in our annual data presentations, but some of you, of course, were not here for those because you weren't yet on the committee. So we thought we would try to put something together that is that summarizes some of that local data that comes from many different sources, some of which some folks I know are familiar. Deborah's at the county, they deal with a lot of data there. But, to provide some of that local context keeping in mind that, remember, that populations that partake in these different services are overlapping in many cases, not so much on the age spectrum, obviously, for early childhood, but with child abuse prevention and foster care, they may well be participating in various aspects of other programming, including early childhood, including after school or mentoring or other aspects. And same now that with adding hunger, for sure, that will overlap. They're knit together. They are not separate. So, but I still think the data would be useful for understanding context and scope. So that's our goal. Between meetings, we should be able to get you that information. So any other questions on allocation, just kind of where we've been? Or does everyone feel like they have an understanding of kind of where we've been with that one? Okay. And we'll hold that topic until next meeting when we have some more number crunching for you.
Okay.
All right, so I think Meg is going to talk a little bit about the RFI.
Yep. All right, so typically in each of our program areas, we issue a request for investment. That is the equivalent of an RFP, a request for proposals, and it outlines what we are asking applicants to provide to us in terms of information. There have been historically 5 sections that are scored in each of our RFIs, and there are some specifics in each of them that are tailored to the program area or our investment focus area, but there's some very similar elements across all of them. And so I want to kind of review what those are and talk about some of the initial thinking around things that may change going forward. So the 5 elements in the past have been, first, program design, which was scored at 25 points. It looks at things like the number of children that will be served, which specific population are we talking about, or where in the city, how children and families would be recruited to a particular service and enrolled, what type of service activities specifically they're getting, what type of intensity is the service, what's the duration of the service, and the proposed staffing for the service. The second is proven and effective programs. That has in the past been worth 30 points. That looks at the rationale behind the type of program being proposed. Why is this the right program for this population and for the outcomes that you want to achieve? What are the types of outcomes that you are assessing and how do you do it? How are you monitoring and understanding client participation and gauging overall program effectiveness? The third is budget cost and effectiveness. That has historically been worth 15 points, and that is the budget for the proposed program and a justification for the resources requested. The fourth is organizational capacity, also has historically been worth 15 points, and that's a general understanding of the organization's track record, staffing processes, and things like a strategic plan and how the proposed program fits with the overall organization and its structure. And then the fifth element in the past was cultural competent and or culturally specific programs and organizations, and that was historically worth 15 points. That looks at a definition of cultural competence for an organization or program, cultural specificity for an organization or program, and asked the applicant to designate itself as one of those, depending on the definition that it met. It asked for information around program materials, training for staff, community engagement, that is culturally competent or culturally specific. It also asked about the demographics of clients served, staff of the organization, and board members. Those were the 5 main sections scored of the RFI in past rounds. We also had bonus points in the past that were worth up to an additional 6 points. So the 5 main points added to 100, and then there were 6 additional bonus points available. The first set of 3 bonus points was available for any program that was culturally specific, and the second set of 3 bonus points was available for any program that served children that resided or attended school east of 82nd Avenue. And those 2 priorities were born out of our previous community input process. So those were the things that we heard were huge priorities for the community, and as such, they were designated as bonus points in the RFI. So all of that said, we've begun to think about whether or not there are areas that need to be revised in our RFI structure and have begun to gather input around those things, very particularly around the use of an equity lens in our RFI document. So how can we operationalize some of the equity goal and thinking that we have by changing the structure of our RFI? So some of the things that we've begun to consider and have been in consultation with others around is the point distribution between the sections. So whether those points that I just discussed should stay as they were or be changed, whether or not to keep the bonus points, and if we do, whether to add additional elements for bonus points or to change the overall number of points that could be awarded for bonus points. Weaving a racial equity focus through all of the sections of the application, so asking the applicant to discuss in greater detail how they understand how their proposed program is furthering equity or how they understand it in the context of creating equitable outcomes for children. Significant changes to the culturally competent, culturally specific section of the application, again, with a focus toward equity, thinking of asking different information about concerns around equity for program development, how the applicant, again, addresses equity in the context of their entire organization, not just for the program proposed. So those are sort of structural things in the RFI that we're considering changing. Some of the other key pieces of information that are offered in the RFI are around the minimum and maximum grant amounts that we are willing to entertain. That's another point of decision that you all will be asked to make at some point, and we haven't yet decided sort of what that thinking is, but just keeping in mind that that's a key influence and is articulated always in our RFIs. And then there are some program area specific topics that we're likely to consider. For example, in early childhood child abuse and foster care, there's been a lot of research and recent work in the community done around trauma-informed care, and so we're wondering whether and how to incorporate some of that work into those RFIs. For after school, in the past, there was a distinction made in the RFI between full-service programs and enrichment programs, and how we keep that, whether or not to keep that distinction in the RFI, and if so, whether we would articulate how resources would be divided between those two different types of service models. And then for mentoring, whether we would continue to reference the same quality assurance standards that were previously endorsed by Oregon Mentors or head in some other direction. So those are sort of the main structural potential change areas in the RFI. And then the last thing I want to bring to your attention is that because we're adding hunger relief now, and we haven't done an RFI in that area before, this will be a first time for all of us. And we think most of the structure of past RFIs will be applicable to hunger. But one of the things that I think we're going to have to keep in mind is that client-level outcomes and what we ask around that area of the RFI might look slightly different there. And instead of focus on client-level outcomes, we may be more focused on things like outputs, how many of something were provided, and looking also more at system-level outcomes to help understand how well children and families are enrolled in larger hunger relief programs like food stamps or WIC. So just something to keep in mind that RFI structure may tweak slightly differently than the other one. So I just covered a lot. Questions?
Well, you mentioned under significant changes to culturally competent, the criteria. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned looking at the equity of an organization. So
what
does that mean?
How the organization understands equity in the context of its program development. So do they understand how or why the program they're proposing would help further the equitable outcomes for children? Do they understand why children's outcomes are not equitable in the first place? Do they understand whether or not they have influence over those things or where their influence may lie? So sort of more philosophical and I think factual and research and historical based understanding of how inequities occurred and how what the work that they're going to do may or may not be able to address some of those, but in what context are they operating the program and in what context do the children they serve live, so that they understand what their place sort of is and isn't in that. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, so you're saying the equity is focused towards the program goal, the program delivery part of an organization.
Our sort of way of articulating it so far has been to how can we help create or advance equitable goals, equitable outcomes for children. And so because our emphasis is around children's outcomes and trying to reduce the disparities, which is one of those overarching goals, we need to be sure that the programs that we're funding understand sort of how disparity came to be in the first place and whether or not the programs they're proposing are indeed going to help create the equitable outcomes that overcome those disparities. And to the extent that they can't, there's things they can't influence. They may not be able to influence housing. They may not be able to influence institutional racism. But what can they influence, and how do they understand how their work operates in that context? Does that help?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
We'll have actual language for you all to look at, but this is really more just conceptual, kind of what directions are we heading? And where have we received a lot of feedback and done a lot of study so far around those issues?
Other questions, comments?
Sorry, Julie?
No, go ahead.
I just, reading through, I noticed we had culturally specific programs and organizations, and then bonus points that mirrored the same language, culturally specific programs. What was the thinking?
The distinction?
Yeah.
So the first section there, the culturally competent, culturally specific programs, just ask someone to first, using our definitions, designate which they were, and then be able to provide evidence that backed up that designation. So if they did that successfully, declared that yes, they are a culturally specific program, and then demonstrated that indeed they met those criteria, then they received the 3 extra bonus points. So does that make sense? So in other words, you couldn't get the bonus points without kind of going through the exercise of demonstrating that you met the definition by providing certain information in the application that indicated that it met the definition.
So is that redundant to or separate from the 15-point category?
Well, that 15-point category also included cultural competence. So there are mainstream organizations that are not culturally specific, and also within that section were scored. So I don't see it as redundant. I see it as a bonus point opportunity. You met the definition, so you got all 15 points, and if you met the definition, you got 3 extra points for being the type of organization or program that we had a preference for. But other organizations could also get 15 points and not get the bonus points.
Okay, that was my question.
That's the clear. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's what you're asking. So a culturally competent mainstream organization could get 15 points on that question. But if you're a culturally specific organization, you could get 18 points in addition. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Just to be clear, that was sort of the way that definition is set up. You could be a culturally competent organization and program. You could be a culturally competent mainstream organization with a culturally specific program, and you could be a culturally specific program, culturally specific organization and program. So there were sort of 3 different types you could designate yourself as, and there were sort of criteria set up in there to test yourself against or right toward in the application about which one you were. And then that was scored.
And I think you said you were going to talk some more about this at our next meeting,
Yes.
the public input, but maybe you could just talk a little bit now, a little teaser about what you're hearing from the community, both from culturally specific organizations and culturally competent organizations about, are they commenting specifically on the structure of the point system or what?
We actually, we've consulted more, we have a conversation yet to be had with the City's Office of Equity and Inclusion, and they have been the main source of consultation for this section and this work so far. So it isn't coming necessarily from grantee organizations per se. We have also consulted with the coalition around this work. And then we've also been looking at
Coalition
of communities of color, thank you, which includes some grantee organizations, but includes a lot that are not. And then we've also been looking at what other grant makers are doing. There was a publication put out about 7 or 8 years ago, which I think, maybe not even that long, 6 or 7 years ago, that is called Grant Making with a Lens Toward Racial Equity. It was put out by Grant Source, and it was it looked at practices across the country in grant making around kind of advancing equity and grant making to do so. And it has been, I think, our primary source of information and guidance around this work, along with the City's Office of Equity and Inclusion.
Also, I would add to that the county's equity lens as well, and the city has sort of a set of equity principles that we looked at too. So, it's been a combination of things, I'd say.
Yes.
I wouldn't say that we have a teaser on public input really per se, because we have not analyzed it all. It's like literally dumping all into a survey. I mean, we have not even started that process. We have to dump it all out, and then we have to categorize it.
Right. When we have multiple sources, we have a survey. We have another community public meeting tomorrow. So we've had two. Our third is tomorrow. We've consulted with around 40 different community advocacy and policy groups. So there's different themes in each of those different buckets, and so there's sort of what did we learn in each of our sources and what have we learned across all of it, and we haven't had the time to distill it because it's rich.
We're still collecting it.
We're still collecting
The
it.
survey closes September 30th.
I also was just wanting to make sure that you, and I was sure you had, but talk to people who are experts in the field as well as just hearing from general public.
Yes.
A survey is just that. It's
Yeah.
nice. It's a tool, but it's not the end all be all. And sometimes you have to go out and get the information.
Yes.
Specifically.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been, I mean, not every group wants to comment on all things, right? So we've targeted specific groups that are concerned with equity in particular and asked their advice about and input, not just advice, I guess, about how things should be changed. And that encompasses not just this, but other aspects of the funding process, if that makes sense. So it's been broader than just this.
So was there any one thing that stood out so far?
Listen,
on
honestly, we'll get into it
organizations?
next time.
No.
I cannot say. I mean, we are sitting there with spreadsheets and the information is unanalyzed, and so I really don't want to go down that path until we get a chance to do that.
I mean, I think what stood out so far is the kind of stuff that allowed us to even bullet out for you in the memo where our thinking is heading. That's sort of looking at point distribution between our sections, whether or not we keep bonus points or add more, how we might significantly revamp certain sections of the RFI. I mean, those are kind of okay, we've gotten that far.
We're still up here, at pretty top level.
So thank you for being patient with no, we don't have teasers for you.
But I promise next time, probably more input than you know what to do with.
Yeah.
So what have we learned, if anything, over time about the proven and cost-effective criteria in terms of better measuring whether programs are, in fact, proven and cost-effective?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things I did go back to look at, so after we did funding last time, we did kind of a debrief process with the committee as such as it existed last time, and to understand kind of, where do we think things went well, or where do we think things need to be improved, what will we change, et cetera. And one of the things that we put in that discussion and brought up and discussed with the group at the time was around, so that you can see in the part that Meg went through, 30 points is given to that section on proven and effective programs. So it's a significant point value for the application, and there's a lot of information that's asked around, how did you design your program? Why did you design it that way? And then how do you monitor it for fidelity and understanding that it's delivered in the way you intended it for it to be delivered? And then how do you understand, are people actually getting the whole model that it's one thing to have a proven model. It could be great to have a proven model, but if nobody comes for the amount of time that's in the proven model, then really where are you getting to the outcomes, right? So there's many aspects to looking at that. It's not just a simple equation. So one of the things that we thought that the elements that we asked for were good and yielded some useful discussion by applicants. But one of the key pieces that was often missing in people's response to that question that we needed to somehow articulate better when we're asking it is that people were kind of repeating what they were doing again. So the program design section is about what are you doing? Tell us what you do and how all the numbers come out so we can understand it. The second section is meant to be why are you doing it that way? What is your justification and rationale for doing X, Y, and Z instead of A, B, and C, or doing it in a certain manner? And so people often didn't answer that well. They would just sort of say, again, what they were doing. So we realized we have to do a better job of asking that question in either a different way or be more clear that we are trying to get at why you've designed something that way and how do you collect information about your program delivery that informs you as to you're doing this right, wrong, need to change this, those kind of things. And these are the kinds of things that we ask in our reporting. So it's not unfamiliar to people who have been funded by us for any length of time, that we ask them to give us this information and to use that information in a feedback loop that says, well, we tried this and we did this and here was what we saw, now we're going to do this instead. So that we're asking for them to articulate in the application, explain how you do that and what sorts of answers did you get or what sort of modifications did you make and what kind of results did you see afterwards. So that's the primary mechanism, I would say, is looking at how organizations do that, how they explain it, and how they can discuss what their systems are in their organization for doing those things. So those are the sort of the primary elements. I don't know that we would change the primary elements, but we may have to get at asking it in a slightly different way, or provide different examples, or do more. I mean, the other thing you can do is do more in a bidders conference around those kind of things, do a little more tutorial about exactly what we're looking for. So we're thinking about a multi-pronged way that we might address that issue. But I think it is an issue we need to address in terms of making it clear to people who are responding what we are wanting in this section of the application.
Okay, thanks.
Because what happens is people just score lower if they don't do it. They just don't score as much. So I mean, it's trying to make sure you explain it as well as you can, so people have the opportunity to offer the information that they have.
Okay. But we could, I assume we could conclude a program proposal is not proven or effective and therefore not funded,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I mean,
Not just- not just-
that section could score, I mean, keep in mind, any of these sections, they score individually, and then that is part of their overall score from one reviewer, and then 3 to 5 reviewers reviewing a proposal score is averaged. So the average score that comes out on the application is reflective of a couple of different factors that influence that final number. Mm-hmm. But yes, if you wanted to drill down to whether or not a program was proven or not and not fund it, absolutely. And I think that that's kind of a different piece of information that we as staff would probably recommend, or sometimes would come up from reviewers as kind of comments that the committee should consider. But just in terms of the point value on the section is one thing.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that's something you can look at. In other words, that's information that for new folks, we do give you that, so you can see what the average score on a particular question was. So if you had a particular concern, or you felt that anyone who scored below a certain number on that question shouldn't be funded, that's a choice you could make. You could set that up as a criteria if you wanted to. The other thing I'll remind you is that often in a funding meeting where you're looking at, points on application is only one thing that that historically the committee has looked at. The committee has considered other things, including people who propose new programs to address an emerging community need or an emerging community. So often people who are recent immigrants or refugees to this community. There's been programs proposed that have been funded to address the needs of those communities, or sometimes groups of them, where they don't have, they're able to articulate the best practices they intend to employ, but they don't have that same track record that an organization that's been delivering services for 10 years. Now, I'm not sure it means that we should never fund a new program that is intending to use best practice when we have a monitoring process in place to look at that over time, when an emerging need happens or when a new community comes that shows needs that are important. So you all are balancing those things, and I think you should continue to balance them, because that seems what we want to do. We don't want to be inflexible to the point of not being responsive to the community. So that's the weighing that ends up going on in any given funding round, I would say, between looking at track record and those kinds of details, and also looking at needs and making sure we're addressing them.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay. Did you want to get into funding strategies too?
Yeah, I want to say a little bit about, we're going to probably finish early anyway, but I'll give kind of a preview of where we're heading for that, because I think that's going to be the most difficult thing that you all will be tasked to doing this time around, because it's different than something we've done in the past. So I'm partly providing this because I know we have 2 new members who haven't been sitting with us for a long period of time, so I want to make sure that there's kind of background. In general, the levy has functioned as a responsive grantor. So we've said to people within very broad parameters, we're funding in these, we're providing funding for programs in early childhood, and the definition of what early childhood is put out there, so it's for an age range, but it's been pretty broad. We fund most programs. You have the option to apply if you deliver a program in early childhood within these very broad parameters. Okay, that's kind of been, and then many people come forward and propose grants, and then you all decide between these many people about which kinds of things you want to do. And there has not been a preference set forth for, we would like to do the following 3 things or the following 5 things primarily, or with the following specific communities or something along those lines. So one of the things that we talked about last time when we brought that analysis of the other levies is that many other levies select strategies up front that they want to fund. And that narrows down the pool of people who apply, but also it provides a levy with more focus on what it will do and the potential for more impact by focusing investments into smaller categories rather than funding many, many different kinds of programs at a time. So what we would like to do is bring some kind of preliminary ideas to you all next time around what strategies the levy should fund next time around, with the idea being that the strategies are the things that would go into the RFI. So that would be something in our guidelines that would say, if you're offering the following types of programming in early childhood, please come and apply and fill out the following application. So the idea behind this is to get more focus and more impact, and the method that we think we could use to do it would be to use, first and foremost, community input that we're gathering. So all of this input that we just described to you is to try to see, are there major themes that come out of that? And now there may not be. We won't know the answer until we sit down and analyze it. But amongst some of those bigger themes, where do we hearing the most resonance? And give people a chance to both come up and testify at meeting, but also look at all these other different avenues that we've explored to see what came out of that. So that's sort of first and foremost. Second, using being able to use any research that's out there. So that's something that staff, again, will be able to provide. So some of the things that Mitch talked about, the local context, the size of populations, those kinds of things, and some of the issues faced by populations, just the data around in the community would be another piece there, as well as any research that is out there that says certain kinds of interventions are particularly useful in driving toward the following results. So that's not, be forewarned that you don't often tend to find research like that. Most research is geared toward, we tried this program, we tested it, this program was successful in doing X, Y, or Z, or not successful in doing X, Y, or Z, rather than saying, if you as a community are trying to affect readiness for kindergarten, the following 5 things are the most important things to do. You don't tend to find that kind of research as much. Unfortunately, it would be very helpful if you did. But to the extent that any of that exists, we will bring that forward to you as well. Beyond those 2 major areas, we'll try to bring any other local efforts that are happening in the community for context. Now, some of you are sort of more or less aware of those, depending on what your posture is in the work that you do. But there's things like Cradle to Career, which are operating. There's the hub in the early childhood hubs that are forming or in the process of kind of they're getting there across the state. There's the Sun Coordinating Council, which helps work in the after-school arena. There's Oregon Mentors, which does quality, you just heard some about it today, some of the quality-based mentoring efforts they're making. So there's different organizations and efforts in our community that also are out there that we will be working in that context, whether we like it or not. And so understanding what that context is, do we want to align with particular things or try to complement particular things? Or where do we fit in that context, I think, is the other big piece of information that we'll be trying to use to inform whatever strategies we come up with. So the idea was that the staff would throw some stuff up on the wall, give you all of this information that kind of provides that rationale or background for whatever we throw up on the wall, and then the discussion begins. So I think it will take, probably all the meetings we have left before we publish the RFIs to try to make those decisions, because they'll be difficult. And I think the community will want ample time to come in and tell you what they think. So that's sort of where we're heading next time. And the October meeting will be the first time to try to start having that conversation with some education around it.
So you'll actually have some proposed strategies for our October meeting?
We'll give you proposed strategies and the rationales will be based on those things that we just talked about: public input, research, local data, and other efforts in the communities. And that's pretty much what other levies, when I looked around what other levies do, that's pretty much what they do. They do a data scan that looks similar to many of the reports that get issued in our community. They look significantly at public input. They do very significant public input, often for like a whole year at a time in some cases. And they look at other efforts in the communities. What's our role given what else is going on? And it could be to align, it could be to complement, it could be different things, but to make sure you understand, at least to some degree, what that context is. So those are sort of the common threads that we saw in the other levies, and we thought we would try to pull those together for you and give you a picture, and I would imagine that the discussion will depart from there and probably maybe not look like anything we've thrown up on the wall by the end.
You mentioned some different organizations around the early learning. What about for the trauma-informed care? Are you going to do the research on that too as well and bring it back? Because I saw that you were it was one of the things that have come up.
That will definitely be
I know that it's been
in the research list around early childhood. That will definitely be on there, because that's been a significant piece in the research field, I would say.
As well as
and also child abuse
too.
And foster care.
Okay.
All 3 of those areas.
Yes.
Questions, comments?
Just have a quick, how soon, or how, will you give us some time between receiving this and the meeting next time? It would be nice to have
Yes.
a while to, not, you know,
We'll
I
do our
understand,
best. Usually I try to give people a week. I mean, if there are, I mean, again, remembering, this will be the beginning. This will be the beginning. Okay, so, I mean, there's going to be testimony, I'm sure. There's going to be, I would be surprised if we are still talking about this in January. So, I mean, I don't want you to also and we're not asking you to make a decision. We're asking you to start the discussion. And there's going to be many insertion points for people to get up and talk about what they want to see in our community. So, and ultimately, decision rests with you about what role you want the levy to play. Because there are multiple things. There are more things that we could do that would be great than we can do. So that's the thing to keep in mind, right? So yes, we will do our best to get you a week of notice, and we'll actually try to get you the local data sooner. We're hoping for that in a couple of weeks to pull something together on that. So you'll have sort of bigger context data. And then, I mean, we do have a little extra time. I don't know if folks in the community want, I mean, if you want to hear other input, if you don't have other discussion, if you want to hear anybody wants to say anything about this direction or where we're heading. Or, I realize there's not specifics on the table yet, but.
So we're pretty much at the end of our agenda.
Yes.
So yes, I think we could accommodate some additional public testimony. Anybody else wish to provide any comments on what we just discussed? Well, maybe not. Okay. There'll be plenty of other opportunities as we progress through this. So this does conclude our meeting. Our next meeting is Tuesday, October 29th, from 1 to 3 p.m. right here in the City Council chambers. The Levy staff will send out reminders and the agenda, which will also be published on the Levy website, which is portlandchildrenslevy.org, or on its Facebook page. And also, the staff will be having, as was alluded to, another public input meeting tomorrow from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. at the Central Library, located at 801 Southwest 10th Avenue. So please feel free to participate in that meeting. And we stand adjourned. Thank you all. And thank the staff for all their hard work, past, present, and future.